it's all made out of 2x4s, pine 2x4s, and they're pretty intricately laminated together. And it's like, I don't know if I could break down 9 months of work in an interview. I guess I get a lot of images in my mind, like they sort of like come together, and the piece evolves over time. The idea of a huge globe was first, and then the idea of the female figure sort of like connected with it in a way. I wanted like classical references in there, and there's a lot of weapons and armor and classical work. So I wanted a hint of like the idea there could be a narrative involved.
It's a running theme in a lot of my work that I think about the immaterial, or about things that are beyond what we can see with our eyes. There are a lot of myths about what is beyond the physical, and yet we're all restricted to these tangible, physical, weighty forms. And so I wanted to make a work that would show the contradiction that I see between those two things. You've probably heard of Elijah before, the biblical character who, at the end of his life, is picked up by a chariot of fire that takes his physical body to heaven. And while I was thinking about the story of Elijah, I was also reading a book by Stephen Hawking, where he was talking about the birth of the universe and about black holes and things like that. And I thought it was really interesting that he was able to come up with these grand theories while being trapped in his wheelchair. And so he seemed like a really good example of that paradox of being mentally free but physically restrained.
This piece is based upon a plumb bob, and a plumb bob is a very old tool from the medieval period. So the idea that when you're setting a wall, you're setting anything and saying that it's plumb, it's basically always pointing towards the center of the earth. So the tool itself is constantly grounding itself back towards the center of the earth. And a lot of my work is based upon this idea of placing ourselves within the landscape. Are we in the landscape or of the landscape? And not really answering one or the other, but it's more or less being aware of that constant sort of disconnect, connect, and that relationship. So this piece is based upon a tool that I think that just the very idea, the essence of the tool is a real wonderful thing. This idea to be plumb, to be totally centered, to always be pointing and grounded back towards the center of the earth, just that idea of being fully aware of your place within an environment. I tend to use the materials that I'm around and that I natural, unnatural, but things that I work with. The bandsaw blades where I use constantly to make my own work, I recycle again. I like the idea that it's both aggressive and non-aggressive. It's a non-aggressive form, but aggressive materials.
Gary Kelly gives an assignment pretty regularly that he calls blue, and that's usually what he did. This time it was red, so that was the kind of the underlying concept, and you can take it pretty much in any direction you want to, but you have to somehow tie in the color red. So I chose the idea of red remembrance poppies and went with that. World War I, doughboy, soldier, and kind of playing off the idea of Flanders Field and the poppies growing on the freshly disturbed soil where the battles had been. I knew about poppies and remembrance, and it was in the process of doing some research that I found out about it. And I also had a teacher who was there, George Pratt, who was very helpful, and he's super into World War I, and he had the helmets and everything in his office, and he brought them out, and we got to set it all up with some authentic gear, which was pretty fun.
This one right here was a piece done for Virginia Living magazine. It was about the fun and diversity and danger on the James River. I believe that ran July of 2008. And this piece over here is a portrait of the horse Big Brown that won, I believe, the Kentucky Derby last year.
They're just UFOs that have wings, but it's kind of superfluous to have wings, so because they're UFO. Just maybe 3 separate ages of the guy that likes UFOs. That's when he was a kid. He kind of grew up over there, and now he's found the UFO. That's kind of the secondary thing that they're smoking cigarettes behind a rock. But supposedly they shut down the UFO that he found, and they're like, hey, I'm gonna sit down and smoke a cigarette while watching this guy finding the looking at the UFO. I kind of wanted to be like so that you see the kids first, and then they're smoking cigarettes, and then you see the slingshot, and sort of you get to find out what they're doing behind the rock.
A lot of my inspiration is taken from photographs. Mostly, a lot of it's just an excuse to draw. And I mean, there's like a lot of different textures and to like cityscapes or that I feel myself drawn to. Well, this one's in Saigon. Yeah, because it's in Saigon. Just any city that's really layered, that's intricate and has a lot of depth to it.
Don't make them. There is no cure if there is no disease. Oh, why'd you put yourself in that